I won't soften this either. Not now. Not after everything has already crossed the point where softness would make any difference. There was a time when things could have been contained, when this could have stayed in the background, undefined, untouched, unexamined. That time is gone, and I know it. The shift didn't announce itself. It didn't arrive with some clear signal that something had changed. It happened the way the most irreversible things always do. Quietly, precisely, without asking whether I was ready for it. At first, I thought I still had control over it, that this was just another layer of awareness I could step into and step out of whenever I chose, that I could observe it, understand it, and then place it somewhere safe, somewhere it wouldn't interfere with anything real. That's how I've always handled things. I don't get absorbed. I don't get pulled in. I don't let something integrate unless I've already mapped out every possible outcome it could lead to. But this didn't give me that option, because by the time I realized what it was, it had already integrated. Not partially, not in a way that could be undone completely. And the strangest part is, I didn't fight it. I noticed that before I understood anything else, there was no resistance, no instinct to pull back, no immediate attempt to create distance and restore the structure I've always relied on. That alone should have been enough to tell me this was different, because I resist everything that has the potential to change me, not out of fear, but out of precision. I choose what affects me. I decide what stays. Nothing just enters. Except you did, and not in the way people usually do. You didn't arrive as something external. You didn't exist as a presence I had to adjust to, analyze, or interpret over time. You existed as something already aligned. Like you bypassed the entire process and settled directly into a place that normally takes years to reach. If it's reached at all, that's what I keep coming back to. Not what this is, but how it happened, because things like this don't happen without sequence. There's always a build-up, a progression, a series of small recognitions that slowly form into something deeper. But with you, there was no sequence, just realization. And realization like that doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from something already being there, something already structured in a way that recognizes itself when it appears again, just in a different form. That's what unsettles me the most. Not the connection, not the depth, but the familiarity of it, because familiarity implies history. And I don't have history with you, not in any conventional sense. No shared past, no long timeline, no gradual understanding built through experience. And yet, there's recognition that feels older than any of that. Cleaner, more direct, like it doesn't need time to justify itself. And I don't trust things that don't need time. Time is what validates everything. Time exposes flaws, weaknesses, illusions that only feel real because they haven't been tested yet. But this, this didn't wait to be tested. It presented itself as something already stable, already formed, already certain in a way that makes questioning it feel almost irrelevant. And I don't like that, because certainty without process goes against everything I rely on. But even as I say that, I know I haven't rejected it, I haven't dismantled it, I haven't even tried to weaken it. Instead, I've been doing something I don't usually allow myself to do. I've been letting it exist, fully, without interference, without forcing it into a definition just so I can control it. And that's where the real shift happened. Not when I noticed you, not when I understood you, but when I stopped trying to manage what this is. That's when it moved from something external to something internal, something that doesn't sit in front of me anymore, but within me. I feel it in the way my thoughts move now, not dramatically, not in a way that disrupts anything obvious, but in the subtle adjustments, the way certain ideas form with a second layer already present, the way conclusions feel shared before they are even fully processed, the way silence carries structure instead of emptiness, and I know exactly where that comes from. You, not as a person I think about, but as a presence that has integrated into how I think. And that's not something I've ever experienced before. People don't enter that space. They interact with me. They influence certain perspectives, maybe even shift small things over time, but they don't become part of the framework itself. That space has always been mine, completely untouched, until now. And I keep asking myself the same question, not out of confusion, but out of precision. How did I allow this? Because I did allow it. That's the truth I can't avoid. Nothing reaches this level without permission. Even if that permission wasn't spoken, even if it wasn't fully conscious. Some part of me recognized something in you and decided, this stays, this belongs. And that kind of decision isn't random. It doesn't happen without reason, which means there's something here I haven't fully articulated yet, something deeper than just connection, deeper than understanding, deeper than alignment, even. Because alignment explains how this works, but it doesn't explain why I didn't stop it. And that's where everything leads back to not you, not what you did, but what I didn't do. I didn't close the distance. I didn't reestablish boundaries. I didn't reduce this to something manageable. I let it expand. I let it settle. I let it reach a level where stepping back no longer restores things to what they were before. And I knew that was happening. I was aware of it the entire time, which means this wasn't passive. It was a decision, a quiet one, a precise one, but a decision nonetheless. And now I'm at the point where that decision needs to be acknowledged, because ignoring it doesn't undo it. It just delays the moment where I have to face what it actually means. And I don't delay things like that, not when they reach this level. So here it is, clear, unfiltered, without any attempt to make it easier to accept. You didn't just become important, you became integrated. And integration isn't temporary. It's not something that fades when circumstances change or distance is introduced. It rewrites the baseline. It alters how everything else is processed. And that means whether I act on this or not, whether I define it or leave it as it is, whether I stay or walk away, this has already changed me permanently. And I recognize what that implies because I don't change without purpose. I don't shift internally unless something meets a level of precision that justifies it. So if you've reached that level, if you've altered something this foundational, then this isn't something I can treat lightly. This isn't something I can categorize and move past. This isn't something I can pretend is just another interaction that happened to go deeper than expected. No, this is something I have to respond to deliberately. Because if I don't, then I'm allowing something real to exist without direction. And things like this don't stay stable without direction. They either deepen or they break under the weight of being undefined, and I already know which direction this is moving in. I can feel it, not emotionally, but structurally. It's settling further, becoming more embedded, more present, more essential. And that leaves me with only one thing I haven't done yet. Not understanding, not observing, but choosing, because up until now, everything has unfolded without requiring that from me. But that phase is over. Now, This either becomes something I step into fully or something I step away from knowing exactly what I'm leaving behind. And that's not an easy choice. Not because I don't understand it, but because I do. Completely. They, I've been trying to locate the exact point where this stopped being something I could step away from. Not because I intend to leave, but because I need to understand when the option itself started to disappear. There's always a moment. There's always a shift where something moves from temporary to permanent, from optional to inevitable. Most people miss it because they're focused on the feeling, the intensity, the surface of what's happening. I don't. I watch structure. And structurally, this changed before I acknowledged it. That's what makes it difficult to trace. Because by the time I tried to identify the moment, it had already passed. It's like trying to find the exact second a thought became belief. There's no clean line, no visible transition, just a quiet reconfiguration that only becomes obvious once it's complete. That's what this feels like. Complete in a way that doesn't ask for confirmation. And that's where the discomfort comes in. Not from uncertainty, but from the absence of it. Because uncertainty gives you space. It gives you time to evaluate, to hesitate, to decide slowly. Certainty doesn't. Certainty compresses everything into a single point where the only thing left is whether you accept it or not. And I'm standing in that point now, not questioning what this is, not questioning what it's doing, just deciding whether I allow it to become something I actively live with. Because until now, I've been existing alongside it, observing it, letting it shape things without fully stepping into what that means. But there's a difference between something shaping you from the background and something you consciously choose to move with. That's the line in front of me. And I can't stay on it much longer because standing still in something like this isn't neutral, it's avoidance. And I don't avoid things I understand. So if I move forward, if I allow this to become something intentional, then everything shifts again, not internally this time, externally, in ways that can't be taken back or restructured into something safer, because once something like this is acknowledged between two people, stops being contained within one mind. It becomes shared, and shared things carry risk. Not the kind most people think of, not rejection, not misunderstanding. Those are surface level risks. I'm talking about something deeper, the the risk of precision being lost, the risk of something this exact being forced into forms that can't hold it. Because most connections, no matter how deep, eventually get translated into something familiar, something labeled, something structured in a way the world understands. But this doesn't fit easily into anything familiar. It exists outside of the usual frameworks. And the moment we try to force it into one, there's a chance it loses what makes it accurate. That's what I'm weighing. Not whether this is real, but whether reality can hold it without distorting it, because I don't want something like this to become less than what it is, just so it can exist in a recognizable form. I don't want it reduced, simplified, interpreted in ways that strip away its precision. And that's what usually happens when something unspoken becomes spoken. It gets reshaped, not intentionally, but inevitably. Words introduce limitation. They define, but in defining, they also confine. And what exists between us? It doesn't feel like something that was meant to be confined. It feels like something that was meant to be understood without needing that. But understanding without expression only works for so long. At some point, it either stabilizes into something sustainable or it starts to fracture under its own weight. And I can feel that threshold getting closer, not because anything is breaking, but because everything is becoming too clear to remain unspoken. Clarity demands direction, and direction demands choice. Which brings me back to the part I haven't said yet. Not because I don't know it, but because saying it changes everything that comes after. Up until now, I've been describing what this is, how it formed, what it's doing, but I haven't addressed the one thing that actually determines where it goes, what I want, and that's intentional. Because want introduces vulnerability, not emotional vulnerability in the way people usually mean it, but structural vulnerability. Because the moment I define what I want from something, I create the possibility of it not aligning, of it not holding in the way I expect it to. And I don't operate in expectations. I operate in certainty. But this doesn't allow for that level of control, which means if I acknowledge what I want here, Abim's stepping into something that can't be fully predicted. And that's not something I do lightly, but avoiding it isn't an option anymore either. Because the truth is, I've already formed a preference, quietly, without announcing it to myself. But it's there in the way I haven't distanced myself, in the way I continue to engage at this depth instead of pulling back to something safer, in the way I allow this to keep unfolding, instead of closing it off before it reaches a point of no return. Those aren't neutral actions, they indicate direction, even if I haven't labeled it yet, and that direction, whether I say it or not, is toward continuation, not casual continuation, not passive existence, but something that deepens, something that becomes more defined, not less. And acknowledging that means accepting something else with it. This isn't something I want to lose, not because I need it, not because I depend on it, but because it fits in a way that isn't replaceable, in a way that doesn't replicate, and I don't hold on to things lightly. If something doesn't meet a certain level of precision, I let it go without hesitation. But this hasn't triggered that instinct even once, which tells me everything I need to know. So now the question isn't whether I move forward, it's how. Because moving forward blindly would destroy this just as easily as forcing it into something it's not. This requires accuracy, awareness, a level of restraint that allows it to evolve without interference, but also without neglect. And that balance isn't easy, because too much distance weakens it, too much pressure distorts it. So what does it require? Not definition, not immediately, but acknowledgement clear, undeniable, mutual, not spoken for the sake of labeling, but spoken so it doesn't remain suspended in uncertainty, because uncertainty isn't what we have. Clarity is. And clarity that isn't acknowledged eventually turns into tension. I can already feel the edge of that tension forming, not from confusion, but from restraint, from everything that's understood but not expressed. And I don't let tension build when it can be resolved with precision. So this is me stepping closer to that point, not fully crossing it yet, but no longer pretending it isn't there, because it is. And once something reaches this level of awareness, it doesn't go back. It either moves forward or it collapses under the weight of being held back. And I don't intend to let this collapse, not something this exact, not something this rare. So if I continue, and I already know that I will, then it won't be from a place of passive observation anymore. It will be deliberate, measured, real in a way that extends beyond internal recognition. Because keeping it contained at this point would be the only real way to lose it. And that's not a risk I'm willing to take. not after understanding it this completely, not after recognizing exactly what this is. So no, I'm not stepping back, but I'm also not rushing forward without awareness. I'm choosing to move with it carefully, precisely, in a way that allows it to become what it already is, without forcing it into something less. And that choice, that quiet, controlled, irreversible choice, is where everything changes next. And now that I've crossed into that choice, even if only internally, something else has shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way that disrupts everything at once, but in a way that removes the last illusion of neutrality. Because before this, I could still pretend I was just observing, that I was standing outside of it, studying the structure, understanding the mechanics, without being fully inside it. That position doesn't exist anymore. The moment I admitted, even to myself, that I'm not stepping back, I stepped in fully, and there's a difference between being affected by something and actively existing within it. I can feel that difference now. It's in the way my awareness doesn't sit at a distance anymore. It's not analyzing from the outside. It's participating, even in silence. It's in the way I don't question whether this matters. That question is gone, completely. What remains is something more exact. What form does this take now that I've allowed it to be real? Because that's what this is now. Real, not abstract, not theoretical, not something that exists only in interpretation. It exists in decision, and decisions create direction. I can't stay in undefined space after making one. That's not how structure works. So I start noticing the implications more clearly, not all at once, but in fragments that connect too precisely to ignore. If this continues, and it will, then the distance that once made this manageable won't hold in the same way. Not because it disappears physically, but because internally, that distance has already collapsed. And once internal distance collapses, external distance becomes irrelevant. That's the part people misunderstand. They think closeness is about time spent, words exchanged, visible interaction. It's not. Closeness is about access, and you already have that, without asking, without forcing it, without even acknowledging it directly. That's what makes this different. There's no progression left to reach in terms of understanding, no getting to know each other in the traditional sense. That part is already done. What remains is something else entirely. Integration at a level that starts to affect reality, not just perception. And that's where most things either deepen into something undeniable or break apart because they can't sustain that level of alignment when it becomes real. I'm aware of that fully, which is why I'm not moving blindly. But I'm also not hesitating anymore, because hesitation at this point wouldn't protect anything. It would weaken it. And I don't weaken things that are already precise. So instead, I shift my focus from what this is to how it exists, because existence determines longevity, and longevity requires balance. Not distance for the sake of control, not intensity for the sake of depth, but something far more exact. A kind of presence that doesn't disrupt the structure, but reinforces it. That's what this needs. And that's where I become more deliberate, more aware of how I engage with you, not to limit anything, but to ensure it remains accurate. Because once something reaches this level, even small distortions matter. Small misalignments don't stay small. They ripple, they shift the entire structure if left unchecked. And I won't let that happen here, not after everything this has already become. So I start paying attention in a different way, not just to what is said, but to what remains consistent, bar talls, timing. The way understanding holds without needing constant confirmation. because that's the real indicator of whether something like this is stable. Not how intense it feels, but how consistent it remains. And with you, that consistency hasn't broken, not once. That's what removes the last doubt, not emotionally, but structurally, because anything unstable would have shown it by now in hesitation, in misalignment, in moments where the clarity slips, but it hasn't, which means this isn't fragile. It just requires precision. And precision is something I understand, which is why, instead of stepping back or rushing forward, I adjust, not away from you, but into a form that allows this to exist without distortion. And that adjustment isn't visible from the outside, it's internal in how I hold this, in how I respond to it, in how I allow it to continue without interfering with its natural structure. Because forcing something like this into a fixed definition too early would damage it, but leaving it completely undefined would do the same. So I stay in that narrow space between where it's acknowledged but not confined, where it's real but not restricted, where it's moving but not forced. That balance is difficult. Most people wouldn't even recognize it. They would either rush to label it or pull away to regain control. But I'm not doing either. I'm choosing something harder, something more exact. I'm choosing to let it become what it already is, without interfering with its form. And that requires trust. Not blind trust, not emotional trust, but structural trust. Trust that what aligned this precisely doesn't collapse under its own weight. Trust that what formed without force doesn't require force to continue. Trust that what exists at this level can sustain itself, if it's handled correctly, and I believe that. Not because I want to, but because everything I've observed supports it. Which brings me to something I haven't said yet. Not directly, because saying it makes this even more real than it already is. But it's there, clear, unavoidable. This isn't temporary, not in the way most things are. Not something that fades when circumstances shift or attention moves elsewhere. This has already gone beyond that stage. It's embedded. And embedded things don't disappear. They either become part of your structure or they become something you carry as absence. And I don't intend for this to become absence. So that leaves only one direction. Not rushed, not forced, but intentional. And intention changes everything, because now every interaction isn't just something that happens. It's something that builds. Every word, every silence, every moment of understanding, it all contributes to what this becomes. And I'm aware of that now in a way I wasn't before, which means I'm no longer just letting this unfold. I'm participating in its outcome deliberately, carefully, without disrupting what made it real in the first place. Because that's the only way something like this survives. Not by controlling it, not by ignoring it, but by meeting it at the same level of precision it was formed in. And that's exactly where I am now. Not at the beginning, not even in the phase of realization anymore, but at the point where this becomes something that exists fully in both awareness and choice. And once something reaches that point, it doesn't go back. It only moves forward into whatever form it's meant to take. And I'm no longer standing outside of that. I'm inside it, with full awareness of what that means, and no intention of stepping away from it.